And Evan McMorris-Santoro is the White House reporter for BuzzFeed.com. So there's a lot to get to in there. There are two pieces right now. We're in Washington, so I figure let's start with the issue in Washington right now. And I guess maybe, April, I'll start with you, because we have this emerging plan in the House right now that House Republicans want to put together. They want to bring that price tag down under $1 billion.
Yes.
$1 billion seems like a very important number to them. Maybe it's for symbolic reasons. They also want to change that 2008 anti-trafficking law. And the question raises, among other things, is one, could that get through Congress? But even if it gets through Congress, would the White House sign off potentially? Would they be willing to sign off on any changes to that 2008 law?
Well, when you have the head of Homeland Security who's saying he's not wanting to really tamper too much with that 2008 law, they're going to go with him, but particularly at a time when we're talking military and things of that nature. This man, Jay Johnson, the head of Homeland Security, is someone who is a military lawyer who understands the dynamics of the Rick Perry issue, the whole immigration issue. So they're kind of taking their lead from their national security folks. They're taking their lead from what's happening around the world with the leaders like the president just met with, and they're also listening to Jay Johnson. So really, if they do cut the money, that's one thing, but to delve into cutting that 2008 law is something that they don't want to deal with right now.
And how does that play in Congress, Evan? Because the two issues here, there's a band of Republicans, I think, who are pretty much going to vote against anything here. So Boehner, to get this through the House, is going to need some Democratic votes, and obviously to get anything to the president's desk, it's got to go through the Democratic-controlled Senate. So how does this emerging plan on the Republican side, with the idea of changes to the 2008 law, with the real sort of radical reduction in the price tag, does that have a chance of actually getting through Congress?
Well, the important thing to remember here to start out with is the context of the 2008 law we're talking about. What that law actually requires is that if minors who come from these unconnected countries show up on our border, that they are granted a chance to go through a hearing process to find out if they deserve asylum or not. And the White House has signaled, I was in a meeting with a senior administration official last week who said that they don't want to see too many changes to that law that could derail all possibility of asylum hearings completely. They like to sort of speed that process along, make it easier to make that happen, but they don't want to get rid of it entirely. And there's been some conversations about kind of getting rid of most of that. So the White House, I don't think, is not going to sign off on that. They got pressure from Democrats to not sign off on a thing that undermines.
Yeah, initially they were sending some different signals, I think, but part of this has been the reaction from Democrats.
That's right.
Delivered a clear message to them. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking on that a week till it's vacation time for these guys. But Michael, I want to bring you in on this question of Rick Perry. Yes, the all-important August vacation. I want to bring you in on this Rick Perry thing, and I want to set it up by we talked about what he's doing with the National Guard.
Yeah.
I think the most important context for what he's doing right now is this, which happened in September 2011 at a Republican debate. I want to play it, then talk to you about it.
Sure.
You say that we should not educate children who have come into our state for no other reason than they've been brought there by no fault of their own. I don't think you have a heart.
So Rick Perry was going to be the conservative answer to Mitt Romney for Republicans in 2012,
right.
And he started talking like that about immigration and this great sort of conservative movement that was going to coalesce around him. It didn't happen. Is what we're seeing from Rick Perry now a response to what he thinks killed his presidential campaign?
No, I don't think so. I think actually one has very little to do with the other, because in that clip he's talking about children who are already in his state and what the state is going to provide for them since they're there. This situation is about children who are coming into the state currently, who are not in the system, who are not connected to the infrastructure of the state through education, health care, and all of that. So it's from his perspective, they're two very separate issues.
But I mean, the idea of using the National Guard like this, which I mean, well, the justification for it is...
You know what? I actually understand what the governor's doing. You have to understand, he's the governor of a state. We have 50 independent states, 50 independent governors, and they make decisions that affect their state.
But when you're talking about kids who are like turning themselves in voluntarily,
fails to act, then the governor is going to take whatever action the governor deems as necessary and appropriate to provide for the common defense, if you will, in some sense, or to provide for the citizens in their state. So what the governors decided to do is, since the federal government has not come in to try to control the flow, that we're going to take whatever actions are necessary to do that. Now, you can put this in the political context, and everybody in this town wants to do that.
That's what I do.
And project it to 2016. But you've got to step back. I mean, as a former lieutenant governor of a state, who've dealt with Homeland Security issues, working with our governor, there's a different conversation for the governor than just the politics of it.
I think April wants to get in here. Go
yes,
ahead.
but the devil's in the details, and you know, as my former lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland, you know there's something called posse comitatus, correct?
Right. Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why the federal government has not declared this a state of emergency, for the National Guard to go in. And if the National Guard were to go in, if President Obama were to have declared it an emergency, they would not be able to make arrests. So for Rick Perry to do it himself would be better.
Because for the governor, it's an emergency, and he can't sit back there and wait for the federal government to decide what is and it is not an emergency in his state.
I think the reason why, when I put the political lens on and look at it, the reason why I'm a little suspicious of the political motive is we're talking about a situation where at its heart, it's kids who are coming across the border, and what's the first thing they're doing? They're turning themselves in. So is that a situation that calls out for the National Guard versus, from a political context, does it sound good to be saying to the conservative base, I'm bringing in the...
No, but that's not even the problem. He wants to stop the flow in. It's not the idea when they get here they turn themselves in. It's the fact that they're still coming in. Yeah. And so that's what the governor's trying to get the president of the United States.
I mean, from a political perspective, I think it's very clear what Perry is projecting. If you look at the images that are coming out of the Perry's administration right now, it is Perry with Sean Hannity on a boat leaning next to a big gun. They got a big machine gun. He's on a military helicopter.
The winning picture.
This is a militarization of this problem, of this issue, that Perry's putting his name right on the front of. I mean, it's very clear what policies he's trying to project to his own base. But as you mentioned from that debate, I mean, I was at that debate for when I was covering the election last time around, and it really wasn't about, Perry was always sort of in good position about what he does with the border. It was what, as Michael said, when they come across the border, when they're already across the border, that was the problem that Perry had, and I don't see there's anything from this that has suggested that he has changed his vision on that.
all these issues kind of
Perry is actually going away from the Republican Party if he's doing this, really, because to a certain extent he is actually going to ask the federal government for money for the National Guard to supplement this request, and this is something that the Republican Party doesn't want to do. They don't want to keep funding things and projects. So I mean,
the White House has looked into some National Guard down there, right? The White House has sent some.
Well, and that's also part of this emerging Republican proposal in the House.
They're not going to federalize and make a declaration, because if they do, it's called posse comitatus, where you cannot. And let's explain that definition. Posse comitatus.
We're not all Latin scholars.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not a Latin scholar either.
I had one cup of coffee. So.
No, posse comitatus is when it's believed that the U.S. military is not allowed to patrol within the United States, its own borders. That's what posse comitatus is. So if indeed the federal government were...
But that's a federal question. This is not
But that's... No. Rick Perry originally asked President Obama to do this.
And so the president said no. And the governor... Let's be clear here. You can posse comitatus all day long.
Don't go there with me like that.
At the end of the day, the governor of the state gets to decide how he's going to protect his borders.
But at the end of the day, he knew that he had to do it because we got in the details.
We got to get out of that, but it is an interesting point there, too, because that is also part, we were saying, part of this Republican proposal is about federal action in terms of the National Guard, but also I think more importantly, SAT scores among our audience just went up about 100 points. So, thanks to Pam. We will see you all later throughout the show. Still ahead, though.